Welcome to Indications and Warnings, everyone, with Chuck Farrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are reporting this show on November 11, 2024. It is day 992 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Of course, it's Veterans Day here in the United States. It's Remembrance Day in the United Kingdom and Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It is also the day Poland celebrates its independence. And 2 years ago today, Chuck, Ukrainian forces liberated the city of Kherson. That's a lot of history coming together in a single day today.
It really is, and it shows how much an effect this war has had and is going to continue to have. And I don't think we quite appreciate what the outcome of this war is going to be and its effect on history. And we talk a lot about the vicissitudes of war, and things go right for Ukraine, things go wrong. Russia is not going to win this war. We're seeing them sacrifice materiel, manpower. Their nation is being brought to the brink of insolvency, bankruptcy, and great sociological change. And you were talking about it just before we went on today. And boy, those factors they're not so much on the front stage right now, but they are there, and they are lurking large.
And Putin must recognize that. We'll address that a little bit later in the show. November 11, 2024 is also likely to be remembered as the day that Russia launched its counteroffensive in Kursk in order to force the Ukrainians out. Interestingly enough, Putin gave his commanders a date to complete this operation. It's January 20th, 2025, which is also the day President-elect Trump will be inaugurated.
And doesn't he wish that might happen? We know that the Russian task elements assigned to eradicate the Ukrainian salient in Kursk, Russia's committed 50,000 troops. That's basically 2 divisions, although Russian divisions, they tend to get smaller as the longer the war goes on, the smaller their elements become. This will cost them, just to estimate, they're losing about 1,500 troops a day now. I would expect, with a determined effort in Kursk, given their inefficiencies in logistics, tactical acumen, leadership, etc., I think we're going to see Russian casualties nudge up into 2,000 a day. And just in the big picture, and we'll get down into the weeds, but looking at the big picture, the orientation of the Ukrainian salient is such that I'm looking at the topographic map right now. This is very escapable for the Ukrainians. Now, they have seized a 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory. They're calling the tune. They can get out of this whenever they want to, but there is a dimension to attritional warfare in what they have done. They crossed the frontier because they knew the Russians would have to engage them. And there are other tactical opportunities as well. With 50,000 Russian troops laser focused on Kursk, there will be vulnerabilities in other places. And we know that Ukrainian military leadership is dynamic, they are opportunistic, and who's to say if they won't come across the border somewhere else? And let's just put that in the pocket, because we might turn out to be right in 6 months or so.
Well, of course, Ukraine is already fighting across the border north of Vovchansk into Belgorod Oblast, not in a significant way, nothing like what they were doing in Kursk, and one shouldn't expect that in Belgorod Oblast in any way. Now, you put up a map about Kursk today, Chuck. To my untrained eye, it honestly looks scary.
Well, what we've seen happen here, uh, we've got the map. In the solid blue area is parts of the salient that are still firmly in Ukrainian control. There are larger areas that are not larger, but areas adjacent to the salient that are striped, indicating those were areas that Ukraine either occupied firmly, or these were areas where Ukrainian special operations forces were prowling around. So, first gasp at that map, it looks like they're they're being pushed in. In fact, they are. But the thing to look at in that map is zoom into the blue areas and look at the highways, look at the roads, and you can see that Ukrainian ground lines of communication and supply, they are firmly in hand, and also maneuver options for Ukrainian forces. They still have a lot of places to go, and there are numerous rivers that transect the salient. And every time you see a river on a map, an army has to pay a great penalty to cross it, right? And your crossing points are, you know, limited in number, and those are points of concentration, and they become lucrative targets.
And the
Now,
Ukrainians, the Ukrainians have blown strategic bridges already. I think there was an attempted crossing by a small Russian force today that the Ukrainians found out about and destroyed.
yes, absolutely. And the Russians have shown that their river crossing ability is not very dynamic. Their bridging equipment tends to arrive in onesies and twosies. They prematurely concentrate their forces, on the originating bank, and we have seen dozens of cases just in Kursk here, where Russian forces come to grief before they can even cross. So the other thing, in my estimation, is Putin has set this January deadline. I just don't see that happening. I think what he's likely to achieve by January, and let's see if we're right in this projection, that he will lose 20 or 30,000 troops in Kursk by January. And in January, let's see if I'm right.
I can't wait. That would be a significant defeat for Russia.
It would be.
Russia chose to launch this Kursk counteroffensive with what I will call probing attacks in sequence. Ukraine repelled all of them. I think there were 5 probing attacks. These were not attacks in force.
Yeah, we have seen this happen so often during the war, that Russia doesn't, when they have a task element, it very seldom is equipped and manned and projected with appropriate force. They always seem to underplay their forces. We've seen hundreds, maybe thousands of Russian attacks that go by the numbers. At tank in the front, armored vehicles, they are all in a bumper to bumper formation. They are approaching the line of contact perpendicularly. They are slowed by mines, stopped by FPV drones, and finally destroyed by artillery. And the fleeing infantrymen who finally dismount and run away, none of them regroup, turn around, and keep pressing the battle forward. We have never seen that happen. So we'll have to see. Interestingly, also in play right now in Kursk are North Korean combat troops. They are in the fight. Uh, Ukrainian signals intelligence has intercepted and is intercepting now Korean radio traffic, and we'll just have to see how they do. And I don't think their combat debut is going to be, well, I don't think they're going to dig it.
So about 15,000 North Korean troops deployed in Kursk specifically. Um, and so that means Russian forces, somewhere around 35,000, 40,000. But Russian casualties today, just at the end of the 5 reported engagements, more than 300. 29 tanks and armored fighting vehicles destroyed by Ukraine. Not a good curtain up on the Kursk stage for Russia. But again, 50,000 troops altogether, that probably outnumbers Ukrainian forces by somewhere between 5 and 10 to 1.
I think so as well. There is a factor that I would say I'm not sure the Russians are ever able to use the tools they are given correctly. Deployed with the North Korean forces are some very capable special operations forces. And I mean capable in terms of long patrol, deep reconnaissance and surveillance. They've got some very capable troops. However, one of the reasons that Putin requested North Korean special operations forces is he has decimated his own special warfare capabilities. He has used his very capable Spetsnaz troops. They don't exist anymore. He has squandered them all as assault elements and firemen and meat waves. So I don't think we can count on him using the North Korean forces in the manner, well, some of them, the manner in which they would be very effective. But I think that they're going to be joining, I hate to call these things meat waves because they're not even, there's a chance that you could overwhelm somebody with 1,000 charging people screaming with bayonets. But we've not seen the Russian forces show that motivation. They don't have it. And they don't adequately craft their force posture to achieve the objectives. They just don't do it.
And I don't think the North Korean troops will be able to instill that kind of courage in their Russian compatriots, nor do I think there's a North Korean commander in Kursk who's saying to his Russian compatriot, "Let me show you how it's done."
It is. I was looking at some video today. We have video of variable quality seeking to prove if there are North Korean troops actually in Kursk. But I saw a very compelling piece of video today, and it showed Russians discussing with their North Korean compatriots who were all holding little language books, and they were teaching them the word syllable. So hopefully that's brevity code for something that happens on the Russian tactical front. Otherwise, it bespeaks a pretty steep language learning curve if you're trying to get them. And that was the word they were trying to get them to say, was syllable.
No time for grammar lessons.
Exactly.
Some speculation and worry that this 50,000 strong troop deployment in Kursk, if successful, would be strong enough to continue an attack into Sumy Oblast in Ukraine. Do you see that as likely or even a possibility?
Well, it would be a very likely possibility, and I would even say a probability. But you have a self-appointed military genius commanding this operation. That's Vladimir Putin. he is not going to be talked into. A brilliant young brigadier comes to the Kremlin and says, I've got a great idea. Let's plunge towards Sumy. Let's turn this whole thing on its head. Let's catch the Ukrainians by surprise. We've got this mass. We've got this force. Let's do it. He's going to say, you jump off a balcony right now, and I want Kursk Oblast taken. I want it liberated. I don't want to hear anything else. So there goes a really good idea, because that's what I would do if I was in command locally. It makes a lot of sense to project down into Sumy Oblast and seek to cut Ukraine's ground lines of communication and supply. That's a completely rational thing to do, right? Again, a 16-year-old cadet from Stanton Military Academy could tell you that's a good plan, but I don't think there is one person in the Kremlin who can speak truth to power. So I think you're going to see an attritional fight for every inch of the Ukrainian salient, and that is exactly the fight that Ukraine wants them to fight.
Ukraine has done a number of things in Kursk. Not only are they prepared, if successful in defending the salient, to remain for the winter, they've already constructed very good winter quarters. But the other thing they've done is constructed defensive lines, as well as laid very deep minefields.
Yeah, this whole incursion was designed to this purpose, right? So this was designed to be a distraction to Russian forces. This was designed to divert manpower and materiel away from the east, in that it failed, actually, because the Russians did not diminish their force posture in the east. They've continued to attack, but that has necessitated Russia to grab 50,000 new soldiers who, for the most part, lack any combat experience whatsoever. And perhaps the Russians thought they will be leavened with with the zeal of these North Korean fighters, but I'm not sure that's going to work either. And as we've seen earlier in the war, we had Russian conscripts, 16, 17, 18 years old, surrendering by 10s, 20s, 30s, and several instances where 100 of them surrendered at once. That's the quality of these troops. I think it's going to take a very long time for Russia to get Ukraine out of Kursk, and they might do it. But the whole purpose of this is an attritional fight against the Russians. And when you know what someone's going to do and you're waiting for them, it's going to cost them big.
An additional purpose, which has come to the forefront because of Trump's reelection, is Ukraine taking a chip that it could use in any negotiations in the future, that chip being Russian territory in Kursk. Now, we know that Trump has had a phone call with Putin. We know the phone call went through because the Kremlin denied it.
Yes, absolutely.
But there hasn't been a readout of the call. A lot of the substance of the call is unknown. It's simply known that the call took place. We all know that Trump has said he can end this war in 24 hours. Some peace plans have been floated by Trump insiders, none of them favorable to Ukraine. They all involve Ukraine giving up territory. They involve a demilitarized zone, the idea of a frozen conflict, and of course, no reparations for Ukraine to recover from the tremendous damage that Russia has inflicted. what do you think about this timing of talk about peace plans right now? I mean, it has to do with Trump's reelection. I know that, but it may also have to do with Russia's attempt to drive Ukraine out of Kursk.
Well, you you can't expect to negotiate anything with Russia and have them honor the terms. So you someone who tells me there is a peace plan, you have to tell me that Lavrov is a worthy interlocutor, right? You can trust him. If he says something, that's what he's going to do. Okay, so there's that. Uh, Crimea is Ukraine. It the Ukraine has no future if Crimea is a Russian aircraft carrier. There just isn't. We only need to look at the other regional conflicts where a settlement was negotiated with Russia, and they took that time to lick their wounds and then take another bite of the apple. So if you were to talk to one of those people saying, look, we need peace, it has to come, you have to tell them this. Would it be okay if Russia just bit off New England? Would that be okay? Should we just let them have New England? I mean, hell, it's not New York. I mean, it's preposterous. And they cannot be trusted. They simply cannot.
We were talking in the last show a little bit about the first and second Chechen wars, and I wondered at that time what brought Russia to the negotiating table at the end of the first Chechen war, and it was casualties. The emergence also of a group of mothers of Russian soldiers who said that they couldn't discover the fates of their sons in the Russian army fighting in the Chechen War. They claimed that Russian casualties were underreported and indeed went on to prove these claims. But at that time, it was only about 14,000 casualties, Chuck, which is compared to what's happening in Ukraine, a minuscule number. And yet it was enough to force the Russians to the negotiating table. And then we all know what happened. They came back, launched the second Chechen War, and succeeded.
Well, that fuse is still burning, right? There is still that social dynamic going on in Russia right now. And with 700,000 casualties, right? So just conservatively, it's one dead for every four, one dead out of four casualties, 3-1, often 4-1. We're still looking at hundreds of thousands of maimed Russian soldiers. And a dictatorship like Putin's, they're always solid until they're not. And history shows us how quickly they can fly apart. Even the most despotic, even the most terrorist organizations can fly apart in a moment. There is a real problem going on in Russia right now. Some of the voices I have heard are saying, look, Putin doesn't dare go for another mobilization, and it's not for reasons of political expediency. He's running out of people who can even go to work 5 days a week, right? Let alone there are 700,000 Russian breadwinners who are either dead or maimed or incapable of working or are going to come home like ticking time bombs. And remember, he started this war with 400,000 people. For all intents and purposes, everyone who invaded Ukraine is dead now. Now, not every single person is dead, but their numbers are decimated. He's almost lost twice as many people as he threw into this war. That's one of those reasons why I'm saying this is Russia's quagmire. It is already worse than their Vietnam. 50,000 Americans died in 10 years of war. They're on par right now, just this year, to lose 360,000 troops. Ellen, that's not working, right? That is not a military that is triumphing.
No, it's not. And we hope that the unraveling of the Russian economy and Russian society happens quickly, but it can't happen quickly enough. I think some of the economic crises that will strike Russia won't become apparent until the middle of 2025. So that's some time off. I also wonder, Chuck, does President-elect Trump actually understand what he is possibly negotiating? He wants an end to the war, but Ukraine has been fighting for 10 years. Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands of both troops and citizens in the course of this war. Millions are stranded in occupied Ukraine, and we know what the Russians are doing in occupied Ukraine. It has been described as a new gulag. So many incidents of torture, mistreatment, genocidal activity are being investigated both by Ukrainian prosecutors and international prosecutors inside occupied Ukraine. I don't think Ukraine is about to give up those millions of fellow Ukrainians to the torture and mistreatment and denial of life. And if Trump doesn't understand that, then he doesn't understand what he's negotiating.
Yeah, and I think the president's experience in real estate and business deals, and having been largely triumphant in that sphere throughout his life, I hope that the president realizes that he has mostly been triumphant in business when he had leverage, right? And that could be everything from compromat to a worsening economic system, whatever. He doesn't have any leverage against Putin. The leverage against Putin is it's going to cost you 1,500 troops a day if you want to keep fighting this in imperial war. And the leverage against Putin is, you know, we're going to open the floodgates of the arsenals of democracy. But I don't see that happening. You can't trust Putin. He started this war. It's been going on for 10 years. Then there is the question of the 200,000 or 300,000 Ukrainian children who have been genocide. Well, it is an act of genocide to scatter these children all over 12 time zones of Russia. This isn't a soluble problem. The other thing I see is, look, Ukraine's safety and security depends on defeating the Russian army, not getting Putin to say, okay, Ali, oxen free. That isn't Ukraine's forward path into security. It is taking the hammer out of Putin's hand, making sure that the next time he comes at you, it's with a greatly diminished force. So even cynically, it's in the interest of the United States to defeat Russia in Ukraine.
It's in the interest of the United States. It's in the interest of the European Union. It's in the interest of democracies all around the world. And of course, Russia stole 200,000, 300,000 Ukrainian children in order to restore a lost generation in Russia. They can only do this by re-educating those Ukrainian children, which is what they are attempting to do in Russia, denying those Ukrainian children to speak Ukrainian, teaching them Russian, and actually teaching them a false history that the Russians hope will be sufficient to brainwash them and turn them against their own country. These children, and I'm glad you mentioned it, Chuck, it's not only about the Ukrainians stranded in occupied Ukraine, it's about the Ukrainian children and the other Ukrainians literally stolen from Ukraine and relocated to Russia. The um, the other thing I was going to say to our viewers, by the way, Chuck and I are not going to get into the peace plans that have been floated or are under discussion. But Jonathan Fink on Silicon Curtain had a really informative discussion today with an analyst from Chatham House, Jonathan Luff. I suggest to everyone who wants to know about peace plans that have been discussed, about outcomes of this war, watch this episode released today by Jonathan Fink on Silicon Curtain. You will walk away fully informed. So, how do you get to Putin to shorten this war? Friedrich Merz, who may become the next chancellor of Germany, has said he would give Putin an ultimatum. You end this war in 24 hours, or Germany will deliver Ukraine Taurus missiles. I actually think it's too late for ultimatums like that, Chuck. I think such ultimatums should have been given to Putin 992 days ago.
I absolutely agree with you. And as good a weapon as the Taurus is, it isn't, it isn't a silver bullet. It just isn't. It is a highly capable, low observable air launched cruise missile. That's it. That's what it is. I'd also point out, although I would welcome a change in leadership from Germany, I don't think that Olaf Scholz minds me reminding the world that he was a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist as a young politician. That's what he was. His attachment to the Soviet Union and to Russia are enduring. He has done everything possible except lay down in front of the trucks rolling out of the Rheinmetall factory. He's done everything else but that. So, and I agree with you. Look, there are no 24-hour ultimatums in this war. It just isn't going to happen. Putin is determined to win his war. Underline it, italics, put quotations. This was his idea, right? And he's losing it. Okay, so he's made gains this summer, categorically. He lost more terrain in Kursk than he gained in the entire East, right? 1,000 square kilometers. It's costing him 1,500 men a day, plus what? 10 tanks a day, 20 artillery pieces a day. Look, these are just normal stats, right? The well's going to run dry. So,
someone did the calculation, Chuck. It has cost the Russians 80 casualties for every square kilometer of Ukrainian territory they have seized this past summer. That is a hell of a price.
You can point at places on the map and conservatively cough up some staggering numbers. Bakhmut, 70,000 casualties. Since Avdiivka, the assaults east of Avdiivka, we're approaching, I don't know, 80,000 casualties just there. How many did they lose in the Kherson offensive? How many vehicles were left on the other side? It's staggering, their loss rate. And if there's one thing that encourages me still and does, I see the caliber of Russian leadership and the standard of training of their troops. It's circling the drain. Their combat effectiveness just diminishes. As face it, morale is 80% of combat effectiveness, and their morale is abysmal. Watch any one of these attacks. Keep your eye on a vehicle. Watch what happens to the mounted infantry, and watch what happens. Watch what direction they go when the attack breaks up. They all run away.
I see those videos every single day. Much the same thing happened in Kursk today, as a matter of fact. Joe Biden has roughly 70 days left in office. Jake Sullivan today in a press conference said that the Biden administration is not going to lift restrictions on longer range weapons that the United States has supplied to Ukraine. These are weapons that could reach airfields inside Russia. They could certainly reach locations where we know Russians are launching their Shahed attack drones from. And yet, with 70 days left to go in his term, President Biden will not lift those restrictions. This is a man so dedicated to the idea of de-escalation, that is, in order to end a war, you need to bring down the temperature of the war. No, there's an alternative, and that is to meet the enemy with overwhelming force. It's an alternative that Biden could have chosen 992 days ago, frankly, and he did not.
It's what should have been done. And let's call a spade a spade. Russia's preparations for this massive invasion were known for months. The Russian forces remained poised on the border for months. They started to get there in August and they stayed there till November, December, January. When they rolled across the border, let's say the ugly truth, they did so with the complicity of the West.
Yes.
Nobody did anything. Nobody did a thing. It was the Ukrainians that did something, surprising the world, and they repelled this force. So it is on the West. And I would urge people to remind the president, we assumed responsibility for Ukraine's security. We did that at the Bucharest Declaration. We told them, you disarm your nuclear weapons and we will be responsible for your security. I don't want to slam President Obama, but I really will. During the middle of this Russian invasion, he was sending them Band-Aids and helmets, right? Why? Why is it okay for Russia to invade a European nation? Because Ukraine is a European nation. When you put things in that simple declarative things, it makes us look pretty bad. And I want everyone to realize it does look bad and it is bad. And we can still do something to set it right.
Yeah, we can still do something. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be sending emails and making phone calls to the White House in Biden's last 70 days of his term. Honestly, I think with a little moral introspection here, these de-escalators would come to understand that their policy of de-escalation is really morally indefensible when you look at the destruction of Ukraine that this policy has permitted the Russians to inflict. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizen casualties, cities destroyed, $800 billion of damage inflicted on Ukraine, half of Ukraine's electrical generating capacity destroyed, the Novakhovka Dam destroyed, and a resulting ecological disaster downstream. And this is not even to mention the atrocities in Irpin and Bucha and in Mariupol, one of the destroyed cities. Now, Russia will reconstruct that city on top of mass graves that will never be found.
I had the distinct displeasure to stumble upon a Russian tool, his account on Twitter. This guy had 1 million followers. I won't even say his name. I don't remember it. I washed my ears out with soap. He was saying things like, the eastern part of Ukraine is Russian. These people want to be Russian. We should let them do it. And I'm glad you brought up Mariupol because I don't usually get into the fight with these sorts of imbeciles, but I noticed that General Ben Hodges decided to lay one into him. So if the general's going in, so did I. And I reminded this tool that Mariupol is surrounded by tens of thousands of people in mass graves who were ethnic Russians. Did they want to go with Russia too? What protected them from the ravenous beast? They were Russian language speakers. They really wanted to be Russian. No, you got shot. You got burned alive in your car. You were raped and murdered and thrown into these mass graves. That is the Ruski Mir. That is what Russia has to sell, right? So it is easy for me to say we don't want peace negotiations. I'm not sitting here. My sons and daughters are not at war. I'm not at war. I have nothing to lose. But Ukraine has a lot to lose by negotiating with the devil, and especially land for peace. You can't negotiate with someone who's already taken your property. And you're going to say, look, that doesn't work with schoolyard bullies, right? They've taken your lunch money. So you want to say, okay, quit beating me up. You can have my lunch money. So many people are willing to do that, Jake Sullivan, who have never faced a bully in their life. Bullies only understand one thing: make it so they find another victim, right? You don't play that game. They pick the bully role. I'm not playing the victim role. Okay. And like I said, I went to 12 different elementary schools as a kid. I moved a lot. My dad was in the Navy. I know a bit about bullies. I really do. You stand up to them and they'll find someone else to beat up.
Well, we haven't stood up to Russia, neither the United States nor the European Union. Now, one of the things that the Biden administration intends to do in its last 70 days is to deliver everything to Ukraine that it's promised. This strikes me as a kind of false urgency, one that is imposed by domestic political reality, not by the reality of the war that Ukraine is engaged in every single day. That's what, to me, makes it a false urgency, Chuck.
It really is. Look, Russia is not on the verge of winning this war. They are not. Bold prediction here. They will never get to the Dnipro River. They are never going to get there. Now, they are on the Dnipro in Kherson Oblast. They're not going to go 1 millimeter. They're just not going to get there, right? How can you subdue Ukraine when you've got, what have they got, 25% of it, 30% of it? And it's costing the Russians dearly. At this time next year, Alan, we're going to be looking at 1 million Russian casualties. Earlier in the war, Putin said, I'm willing to lose 2 million men in Ukraine. His words, not mine. And Vladimir, don't you wish you might get it? Because 2 years from now, you're going to be there.
You will be there. Russia occupies about 20% of Ukraine after the gains of the summer, which really were incremental. The U.S. Congress reconvenes this week after the election. Mike Johnson, who retains a majority in the House, has already said there will be no additional aid for Ukraine passed in what's called a lame duck Congress. And this is a Congress between now and Christmas, with a brief Thanksgiving recess. They'll be doing business. They'll be taking votes, and they will be actually in the Senate. The Republicans, who will have a majority, will be electing the person who will become the next majority leader in the Senate. We don't know who it will be. There are 3 candidates, none of them strong supporters of Ukraine. John Cornyn of Texas, one of the candidates, has voted for Ukrainian aid. John Thune, Dakota senator, has voted for Ukrainian aid. Rick Scott, a Florida senator and the candidate favored by Trump, by the way, is pretty iffy and seems to be taking his orders from Trump, which might well sink his campaign to become the next majority leader in the Republican Senate. But I don't want to get lost in the weeds of American politics, Chuck. Rather, I want to move back to the battlefield in Ukraine. And something caught my eye this week. It was a story about Ukraine developing fiber optic drones. And these cannot be jammed. We know that electronic jamming equipment saturates the battlefield as much as the skies above the battlefield are saturated by drones. A fiber optic drone cannot be jammed and intercepted.
Right. And it's always amazing to me. You and I are in this information fight. It's always amazing to me what bubbles to the top every now and then. The fiber optic drones are actually about a year old. And believe it or not, there are a lot of weapons that trail a wire behind them. As crazy as it sounds, very advanced torpedoes trail a wire behind them. And just as you were saying, so instead of receiving radio or transmitting their video in the case of a first-person drone, it's all its videos and flight commands go down a fiber optic cable that's about the size of a piece of fishing line. And that's done. You have a spool in the drone itself and a spool back at the operator. And so they spool off their various cone-shaped devices, and there's very little friction involved. So it's just very likely that the battle between the weapon and its countermeasures and the countermeasures. This is an evolution in weaponry that we've seen certainly since before the Civil War, the first modern war. Cutting the telegraph lines and everything that we've seen happening.
Yeah, Russians were the first to deploy fiber optic drones, but it appears that Ukraine, as you would expect, has both caught up and surpassed Russian development of fiber optic drones. These are not long-range drones. They are truly battlefield drones. They might have a range of 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers, or something like that. These are not drones flying deep into Russia to strike refineries and fuel depots and that kind of thing. They are specifically for the battlefield.
Right. And we saw the largest Ukrainian drone attack on Moscow just in the last couple of days. From what I was able to see of the Russian, video from the target area, there appeared to be a preponderance of those drones were Luna NGs. These are fixed wing monoplanes. They have two booms and twin rudders and stabilizers in the back. These things out of the box have an 8-hour flight endurance and more if you modulate the payload and the fuel cells. So what's delicious to me is even if these things get to Moscow and get shot down, they are still closing the airport. So I want you to imagine you go to LAX to catch your flight and an enemy that's 600 miles away has closed the airport. I like that. The other thing I like is these are strike capabilities that the United States and NATO have denied to the Ukrainians. We don't want to give you anything that could hit Moscow. So it's the Ukrainians themselves who have developed these weapons. And that's bad for Russia. Basically, if you don't like what they've got now, you're not going to like next Christmas. I'm telling you.
Yeah, the night that Ukraine launched its largest attack on Moscow was another night of attacks that Russia had launched against Ukraine every day, every night. These these two attacks, both the largest of their kind of the war, by the way, occurred on the same night, coincidentally. But just in 1 week in November, Chuck, Russia has used 800 glide bombs, 600 drones, and 20 missiles and cruise missiles to attack Ukrainian civilians. And this is occurring all over Ukraine. And just the last 2 nights, Kharkiv, Kyiv, Mykolaiv, Odessa, Sumy, Zaporizhia, all attacked with both drones and glide bombs. Dozens of Ukrainian civilians killed and injured. Rescue from the rubble goes on for hours and hours, 24 hours on end. This is an escalation, it seems to me, of Russia's air assault on Ukraine, more intense today than it has ever been at any time in the war.
Well, you and I have been working a long time covering this war, and everyone has heard me say this a million times. 95 to 98% of Russian weapons that have a precision strike capability deliberately hit civilians. So do a little battle damage assessment. The next time you're looking at a video and you see a fire 10 stories up in a 20-story building, I want you to realize that that weapon was specifically targeted for the 10th floor, right? Why? Because the fire is almost impossible to fight on that level. These are strikes that are predetermined to cause civilian casualties. And again, no nation has ever had their civilians bombed into submission. Not the British in the Blitz, and frankly, not the Germans in World War II, who produced more airplanes in 1945 than they did throughout the entire war. It galvanizes the people. It does not subdue them, right? The Americans did not bomb the North Vietnamese into submission. It's impossible to do that. However, this is Ruski Mir. This is what they want. They have destroyed every city that they have taken, and they have reached out to try to destroy every city that they can reach. We, in the scope of peace negotiations, try to imagine a prostrate, defeated Ukraine lying at the feet of Vladimir Putin. What's life going to be like in that place? This war has to be won. It has to be won. It can't be frozen, because I promise you the Russians will come back. I promise you. And we won't have to wait 10 years to see it. We have to look at Chechnya. It only took them 16 months to come back. 1 year.
2 years. 2 years. Less than 2 years. I do think that almost as a result of Trump's reelection, and because of his pledge to end this war in 24 hours, and now these peace plans floating to the surface everywhere, I think this is part of the reason why Russia is fighting as intently and as evilly as it has ever fought in this war. In the month of October, 320 incidents of Russia deploying chemical agents and gas on the battlefield. We have seen Russian cold-blooded murder of Ukrainian prisoners of war on the battlefield increase, become almost a daily atrocity. And this is Russia attempting to force Ukraine to accept some kind of negotiation. I don't see Ukraine being forced into negotiations of any kind by Putin or by Trump or by uh, anybody else.
Yeah, Jake Sullivan seems to worry about Russia's red lines. For example, we don't dare shoot down Russian strategic bombers who squirt dozens of cruise missiles at apartment buildings almost nightly. I'd love to have a beer with Jake. Just convince me that that's a good idea. The Russian use of chemical weapons has only expanded on the battlefield. It started with hand grenades you could throw, and it was anti riot agents. Now it's asphyxiant gases, right? No longer just riot gases, things that cause you to asphyxiate, right? Then it was, okay, you put them on drones and you drop them. And then it was every now and then we use an artillery shell that has gas. And every now and then we use some mortar rounds. There's a red line. Knock it off. Knock it off. Knock it off now. Make it stop now. Or there's going to be consequences. There doesn't seem to be anyone in Washington who seems to say that, right? Sometimes I can't help but think the last good person to go to Congress was Davy Crockett. Okay, that was the last good one. And, it didn't come out too well. He quit in disgust, as I recall.
He did. I don't think I'd go that far back in history, Chuck. I might go, I think I'd go as far back as John McCain.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that one. But the exception proves the rule.
There you go. We're going to take a very quick look at what is happening in Kurakova, where the Russians have destroyed or partially destroyed the dam that created the Kurakova Reservoir. It's going to create some flooding. This would be to the west of the reservoir. Ukraine has been counterattacking in Kurakova, but their situation there hasn't been great, and it seems to be deteriorating further.
Yeah, there is there's a point to the Russian madness there. If you are looking at put up a map of Karakova, I believe it was today, but the water course goes from the dam and it goes directly to the west. If they blow that dam and massive flooding occurs, it's going to cut off a Ukrainian salient south of the reservoir that heads to the southeast. Depending on how bad that flooding is, it's going to make resupplying, reinforcing that salient. It's going to make it very difficult for Ukraine. You might have to see Ukrainian forces withdraw. Again, I'm not a general and no one asked me to be, but if my forces in that considerable area, if their logistics were that complicated by a very big flood, almost to the level, not quite the level at the Nova Harkova Dam, this would be the second large reservoir that they've blown and probably the 60th or 70th reservoir that they have blown. They've done this scores of times on the battlefield. This is one of the larger ones. So we'll have to see. And again, blowing up a dam is guess what? It's a war crime too, but nobody's counting at this point. But this could be a serious development for Ukrainian forces, which have maintained south of Kharkov pretty well up to now. That may have to end, unfortunately.
And Kurakova is by no means the main arena. Chuck and I will be back later this week to look at the main arena, which is really in Pokrovsk. That's where the majority of daily engagements occur. That's where the fighting is extremely heavy. Also have heard reports of Russians assembling an assault force in Zaporizhia, kind of south of Orkiv. We're keeping our eye on that as well. Ukrainian commanders anticipate a renewed Russian attack up towards Kyiv. But we're going to address these theaters later this week, Chuck. One thing I want to do before we close indications and warning. I've never understood wishing a veteran happy Veterans Day. It is a day of remembrance, but I've never come up with a word to substitute. Sometimes proud Veterans Day, sometimes honored Veterans Day, but happy is not really the greeting you give a veteran on Veterans Day.
Well, I think every veteran would be delighted to be recognized. And I put up a tweet about this just before Veterans Day. When you wish somebody happy Veterans Day, I promise you the first thing they do is think of the people who didn't come back. That's what every veteran thinks of first. But I know that I always take it with humble thanks, and I appreciate it. And I also would sometimes say, thanks for giving me the greatest weapons and the greatest men to work with, the greatest men and women I ever knew in my life, and thank you for sending them with me. That's what I say.
Well, that's a good way to think about Veterans Day here in the United States, Remembrance Day in the United Kingdom and Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And it's a day when we also think of all the Ukrainian soldiers who have given their lives defending their families and their country, defending their freedoms and our freedoms. And I know that there are Ukrainians every day who think of the ones who are not coming back. They have given their life, and they're not coming back. That doesn't stop me from believing in Ukraine's fight, in believing that they can defeat Russia, and in understanding that the only way for the war to end is for Ukraine to decisively defeat Russia and to restore its own sovereign borders. I don't know why this needs to be said continuously for 992 days. And I do want the policymakers in Washington and in the European Union finally to wake up to the fact that it's possible only when they supply Ukraine with everything it needs without restriction of how Ukraine can defend itself. It's very, very simple as far as I'm concerned to understand.
And folks, I don't care if you're an R or a D, it's all of America working together. But, you know, our great republic was put together by some pretty smart people. And your government has accountability to you, especially in the House of Representatives. Those men and women, some of them are rascals and scoundrels, but they are there for only 24 months and they serve at your pleasure. So if you give a damn about Ukraine, look, you can pick up the phone right now, call your representative. You won't have to talk to anybody. You just leave a message. Tell them you're concerned about Ukraine. Tell them you don't want Russia to dominate Ukraine. And Alan worked on the Hill. He knows that the chief of staff is going to have the overnight phone calls right in front of the boss Monday morning.
This is true. So make your phone call one of the ones that count. And end that phone call as Chuck and I end indications and warnings every show. It's a phrase, if you use it, you have to mean it. And Chuck and I really do. Chuck, Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava.
And thanks for your service, Chuck.
And thank you, Alan. Thanks for sending me. Good night, everybody. And hey, spread the word, indications and warnings. And it's not just Alan and I, the Information Warfare Initiative. There are dozens of great programs on there. national security affairs, geopolitics, and a lot of really smart people with English accents. So give them a listen.
Good night, Chuck, and thanks.
Good night, Alan. Thanks a lot.